On the International Day of Peace, we are thrilled to hear that the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and France are about to recognize the sovereignty of the Palestinian state. They would join countries such as Venezuela, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and others who have long called for peace in the Middle East, including the establishment of the Palestinian state, and Israel must abide. However, Israel does not look interested in supporting Palestinian independence, and instead they threaten to continue the war forever. It is refreshing to see that the situation in the Caribbean and Venezuela is de-escalating. Venezuelans, however, remain cautious, as noticed over last weekend when the military units went to several neighborhoods in Caracas and other cities in the country for training civilians on how to use military equipment in case we are invaded by United States military forces, which must be repelled as they are seeking a regime change that would facilitate the surrender of our natural resources. However, it seems that will not be the case. President Nicolás Maduro several weeks ago wrote a letter to President Donald Trump proposing a dialogue through Special Envoy Richard Grenell, with whom he has been speaking at length recently regarding the inaccuracies in claiming that Venezuela is a significant stopover point for drug trafficking in the Caribbean into the United States. The letter was received by Donald Trump, and when asked about it, he said he still does not know what to do. Over the weekend, Donald Trump wrote a social media post requiring all Venezuelans to leave the United States immediately. We are talking about 300,000 or more Venezuelan nationals who are illegally in the United States, as their previous TPS protections have expired, and Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem long ago determined that the situation in Venezuela has improved, and therefore Venezuelan nationals are urged to come back. The Department of Homeland Security even offers illegal migrants a $1,000 bonus plus a complimentary airplane ticket so that they may self-deport. However, Donald Trump is asking the Venezuelan authorities to cooperate in deportation matters. The mathematics of deporting so many people look challenging. Nowadays, only 2 flights per week transporting about 200 illegal Venezuelan migrants from the United States back to repatriation in Venezuela, to the number of only 200 people per flight, and that would be only 400 people per week. That is insufficient. In order to deplete unneeded Venezuelan population in the United States, a reasonable estimation would require 10 daily flights carrying 200 passengers each, meaning 2,000 daily deportees back into Venezuela, which would translate into 14,000 Venezuelan deportees per week. This is 35 times more than what is currently being offered. The Venezuelan government does not have 10 airplanes available for this kind of transportation on a daily basis. The last time we could remember so much traffic between the United States and Venezuela was during the 70s and 80s and 90s, when there were Pan American, World Airways, American Airlines, Delta Airlines, and United Airlines, and Continental Airlines, plus Viasa Aeropostal, Avenza, Varig from Brazil, and LAN-Chile. They all provided non-stop flights from Caracas or Maracaibo into Miami, Houston, or New York. A similar combination of Venezuelan aircraft and United States aircraft, featuring both commercial and military equipment from both countries, would be required to honor Donald Trump's request of deporting 1,400 Venezuelans daily from the United States. It is possible, but it requires a lot of organization. There is some truth in the statement that many Venezuelans in the United States have mental problems because of previous opposition leadership insistence in promoting mass emigration out of Venezuela during the last few years, as they expected to deplete the country from its population, move them all into the United States, so that the United States cities would feel pressure to invade Venezuela, so that they could all come back. However, a United States invasion against Venezuela is not required for Venezuelan nationals to return, as a concerted effort between Venezuelan authorities and United States authorities, such as Tom Honan, Czar of Borders, and Kristi Noem, Secretary of Homeland Security, and Pam Bondi, Secretary of Justice, they could all be coordinated together under leadership of Richard Grenell, Special Envoy to Venezuela, so that deportation flights can increase using aircraft from commercial and military ownership from both United States and Venezuela. That way, we could ensure that 10 daily deportation flights are made available, so that within 1 year, all illegal migration from Venezuela into the United States is safely deported back to their home country. Venezuela will always receive its nationals into our national territory, and they should be encouraged to open businesses and promote recovery of our battered economy. It is noteworthy that news of this dialogue are not being appropriately addressed by social media. It looks like the hawkish tendency in the United States government is using all the tools at their disposal to continue a war narrative. However, such war narrative is endangered. Last shooting of a ship in the Caribbean by United States military failed to mention that the boat was actually Venezuelan or departed from Venezuela, or that the people killed were of Venezuelan origin. It seems that Donald Trump is carefully assessing these new dialogue invitations, and he must process them in due time. We should expect, however, what will be official statements in the United Nations General Assembly, as presidents and prime ministers from all over the world are already traveling into New York City. Regarding Caribbean alliances, it looks like most of the Caribbean islands are firmly against war, but still we have Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana leadership and some of their population worry of peace. Apparently, Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana believe that the United States will protect them forever, and at this time we are not sure on who are the allies of the United States, considering that Australia, Canada, United Kingdom, and France, which are supposed to be very important trading partners and military allies of the United States, are now siding with Palestine, and the United States is alone in its support of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu has made it clear that recognition of Palestinian state is not possible, and that he will by force conquer everything needed to his greater Israel that involves sovereign territory of other countries, including Palestine and maybe Jordan or Saudi Arabia. However, the nuclear deterrence provided by Pakistan and Iran might eventually change the picture if the situation escalates. The agreement between Russia and Venezuela is extremely important. Venezuela has with Russia an agreement comparable to the agreements that Russia has with China, Iran, and North Korea regarding military help and also cultural, economic alliances. Soldiers and military equipment from various Venezuelan allies is already deployed in Venezuela, waiting for the United States to shoot first, as Venezuela remains in its position of always being in the defensive, as we have no intention of offending the United States. We would rather solve the immigration problem that the United States is enduring, and Venezuela will devote a lot of diplomatic efforts to help Donald Trump's administration to safely deport as many illegal Venezuelan migrants out of the United States as soon as possible. Regarding the drug traffic, Venezuela urges the United States to turn its attention to Ecuador, for example. Russia recently seized a cargo ship of bananas coming from Guayaquil port, all of them filled with cocaine, igniting questions on the local Ecuadorian government handling of international drug trade. Colombia's president continues being harassed by the United States, mostly by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He is traveling to New York, and he will make Colombia's position crystal clear in the next few days. Colombia remains committed to helping Venezuela, as our joint military exercises for several months have suggested, and the Caribbean must remain a zone of peace. However, the Caribbean zone of peace will need some sort of defense capabilities. Caribbean countries have always been used of being defended by the United States, but that is only a minority position by Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Jamaica. The rest of the Caribbean is taking notice that the United States military help is inconsistent, and we do not want to be in the situation of Qatar, who thought it was an ally of the United States. It bought a lot of weapons from the United States, and still Qatar got Israeli missiles in Doha, the capital, because the United States defense machinery failed to operate due to programming that Qataris were unaware of. Peace is very important. Peace can be reconquered in the Caribbean. Presidents Maduro and Donald Trump must speak. Marco Rubio will eventually have to claudicate. And if Marco Rubio does not claudicate, he will need to be forced out of the Department of State, because there are no achievements of Marco Rubio's tenure. The war in Ukraine continues, and the stubborn support to Israel's genocide throughout the Middle East is Marco Rubio's achievement, rather than the unity of all other Arab countries. If Venezuela and the Caribbean manage to become a zone of peace again, we will need to refocus our diplomacy into helping Palestine and the Middle East gaining comparable peace. And of course, we are quite worried on developments in Europe, as Poland and Estonia are increasingly denouncing hostilities by Russia, while Russia claims that all of these calls are fabricated so that NATO can go into war with Russia. Poland, Estonia were once part of the Soviet influence area and will now need to find a way to have a gracious relationship with both Russia and Europe, because it does no good to the world that you become enemy of your neighbors. Venezuela, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago remain with that problem. There is a lot of mistrust between our countries, and we should foster a dialogue with Guyana regarding the Essequibo dispute that will lead to joint ventures on our oil industries. And we need more cultural programs between Guyana and Venezuela. We need roads through Barima Waini and through Cuyuni Masaruni into Delta Amacuro and Bolivar. We need a pipeline from Anzoátegui, Monagas, and Delta Amacuro into Barima Waini and Pomerum Supenam. And we need to re-establish conditions for joint Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela gas ventures in Plataforma del Tana and Gran Mariscal Sucre gas fields featuring Cocuina, Dragon oil fields. Grenada, which is not far away, has been a great ally of Venezuela, just as St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Barbados, and they should all come to urgent security talks of the Caribbean, because we must remain a zone of peace while preserving our peace with a suitable army military agreement, so that if one of us is attacked, the other countries can come to the rescue. A similar strategy is being sought in the Arab world through Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt. Jamaica remains expecting the United States to defend the Caribbean, but eventually they will realize that the rest of the Caribbean community does not support that hope, and Venezuela would be benefited if we are able to redevelop our oil industries so that we can help develop newly found oil deposits offshore in Jamaica and Cuba. If this dialogue between Donald Trump and Nicolas Maduro becomes a reality, thanks to the special envoy to Venezuela, Richard Grenell, we will always thank the ALBA countries of the Caribbean, St. Lucia, Grenada, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Bolivia, Cuba, Nicaragua, who are helping Venezuela since the very beginning to promote the Caribbean as a zone of peace, and our activism provided grounds for the CELAC community of Caribbean states to support our peaceful view, which was recently supported also by the non-aligned movement of nations representing 120 countries in the world, primarily from Africa and Asia. All of them support peace in the Caribbean as expressed in the old Tlatelolco Treaty signed many years ago that declared the Caribbean Sea a peaceful zone free of nuclear weapons. Puerto Rico remains occupied by the United States military, and it is our expectation that all this military deployment will eventually be sent back into the United States mainland, because they really have nothing else to do, as war seems to be averted between the United States and Venezuela thanks to worldwide diplomacy that has shown the world conclusively that Cartel de los Soles does not exist, Tren de Aragua does not exist, drug trafficking in the Caribbean is only 5% of what arrives to the United States. Most of the traffic goes through Central America or the Pacific or Mexico, and Donald Trump is completely reasonable in expecting Venezuelan migrants who violated United States immigration laws. They should either self-deport back into Venezuela or they should be deported. The Venezuelan government should emphasize dialogues in the operational challenges of supplying 10 daily deportation flights during the next year. If we are able to deport 14,000 Venezuelans every week out of the United States, the entire immigrant population of Venezuelans in the United States could be returned safely into Venezuela by September 2026. It is an ambitious goal, but it is doable. Venezuela has plenty of land to receive those people who were made crazy by opposition leadership, who asked them on social media during the last few years to emigrate, promising them that life in foreign countries is better than life in the homeland. That is not true. Venezuela during the last few days has been normal. Of course, we have more military presence than before, as our military is preparing for defense actions in case the United States invades. But in general, Venezuelan life is becoming back to normal. The petroleum industry during the next few weeks should continue to recover as our attention will shift back into productivity and less into emergency arrangements due to the wishes of people who are interested in contributing to the business of war. It also must be remembered that throughout Venezuelan history, whenever we had street clashes and protests, always dialogue prevailed, which makes us think that this is not going to be the exception. We've had plenty of confrontation during the last few weeks, which hasn't led to anywhere, and now it is the time to implement constructive dialogue between Venezuelan authorities and United States authorities so that there is a continuity in the actions for drug counter traffic, and we must acknowledge that for Donald Trump, illegal Venezuelan immigration is unacceptable, and Venezuelans within the United States are urged to self-deport immediately and repatriate back into Venezuela where they belong.
Nicolas Maduro Moros, President de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela, Caracas, September 6, 2025. His Excellency, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. Respected President Donald Trump, I am writing to submit some ideas and information for your consideration. At present, there are many controversies regarding the relationship between the United States and Venezuela. Amidst these controversies, we have observed a proliferation of disinformation, often referred to as fake news, propagating through various media channels. I recall the fake news that Venezuela had refused to accept migrants back to our country, but this issue was quickly resolved and clarified in a conversation with Ambassador Richard Grenell. To date, this channel has functioned flawlessly. During these initial months of your second administration, we have consistently sought direct communication to address and resolve any issue that arises between our two governments. In recent weeks, the false accusations of links with mafias and drug trafficking gangs by high-ranking Venezuelan authorities have dominated the news. This is the most egregious instance of disinformation against our nation, intended to justify an escalation to armed conflict that would inflict catastrophic damage across the entire continent. I had a lengthy discussion with Special Envoy Rick Grenell on this and other issues. In that sense, I am sending you compelling data on drug production and drug trafficking in South America. This data conclusively demonstrates that Venezuela is a territory free of drug production and a country not relevant in the field of narcotics. This is due to the immense effort made for years by our police and military forces. According to data from the UN and other organizations, as well as corroborated by intelligence agencies, 87% of the drugs produced in Colombia are shipped through the Pacific ports. 8% are shipped through the northern Guajira region of Colombia, and only 5% attempt to be transported through Venezuela. However, all drugs seized along the 2,200-kilometer border with Colombia are intercepted and destroyed. It is noteworthy that this year, we have already neutralized and destroyed more than 70% of the small amount of drugs attempting to cross the border, which is more than 2,200 kilometers long. In accordance with Venezuelan law, we have destroyed 402 international drug trafficking aircraft. These data confirm Venezuela's impeccable record in the fight against international drug trafficking, as expressed by all international organizations and agencies specialized in the matter. President, I hope that together we can defeat the facets that have sullied our relationship, which must be historic and peaceful, as always. envisioned by our liberator, Simon Bolivar. I have publicly acknowledged the significant efforts you are making to bring an end to the war you inherited in other regions of the world. For this reason, I support the recent declaration by the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, which formally recognized Latin America and the Caribbean as a region of peace on Thursday, September 4th. I respectfully invite you, President, to promote peace through constructive dialogue and mutual understanding throughout the hemisphere. These and other issues will always be open for a direct and frank conversation with your special envoy, Rick Grenell, to overcome media noise and fake news. From Caracas, Venezuela, the cradle of liberators, I am committed to defending peace and life. Nicolas Maduro Moros. Please find attached 2 maps from the World Drug Report.